Good evening and welcome to Pune International Center. I am Abhay Vaidya, Director PIC. This is our sixth lecture in the series India and the World's Great Religions, curated by our members Dr. Latika Padgaonkar and Senior Fellow Professor Pradeep Apte, the chair for today's session. This lecture series was conceived by PIC's Vice President Dr. Vijay Kelkar to underscore the plurality of the Indian ethos. We've had fascinating, insightful lectures on Buddhism, Jainism, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism in this series. Today, we are honored to have with us author, diplomat, and former Member of Parliament, Ambassador Pawan Verma, to speak to us on Hinduism. Mr. Verma is a prolific writer and author, as almost all of us know, and he has written more than a dozen books, many of them on Hinduism. His latest book is The Great Hindu Civilization: Achievement, Neglect, Bias, and the Way Forward. He is a fine orator, and listening to him is music to the ears and food for thought because of his eloquence and mastery over the subject at hand. Mr. Verma graduated in history from St. Stephen's College and topped his class. He then took a degree in law from the University of Delhi and later joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1976. As a diplomat, Ambassador Verma has served in various capacities, including as ambassador to Bhutan. His passion for writing has seen him produce bestsellers one after the other. These include Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism's Greatest Thinker, The Great Indian Middle Class, and Being Indian, The Truth About Why the 21st Century Will Be India's. This title was also published in the UK and translated into Japanese, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Italian. Mr. Verma is a recipient of numerous awards and honors. He was conferred an honorary doctoral degree for his contribution to diplomacy, literature, culture, and aesthetics by the University of Indianapolis in 2005. He is the recipient of Bhutan's highest civilian award and the Kalinga International Literary Award for 2019. He has served as the cultural advisor to the Chief Minister of Bihar, and he was member of Rajya Sabha from 2014 to 2016. Welcome, Ambassador Verma.
Thank you.
Chairing today's session is Professor Pradeep Apte, Senior Fellow PIC and Professor Emeritus, Savitribai Phule Pune University. Professor Apte is an eminent professor of economics with areas of expertise in operations research, econometrics, international trade and finance, public economics, and agricultural economics. He has been a member of several state and central finance commissions and is a visiting faculty at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Ferguson College, and a number of other institutions. He has deep interest and knowledge of history and writes a popular column in the Lok Satta. This program has a Q&A segment, and you are welcome to post your questions in the question box. May I now request Professor Apte to initiate the proceedings. Sir, the floor is yours. Professor Apte, you are on mute. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Welcome, sir. I am at the outset. Let me, in fact, express kind of a limitation that we face. We know that the subject that you are going to tackle and speak about, it's so complex, it's so vast, and yet we expect you to do that in something like 40-45 minutes, so that we would be able to spare at least 10 to 15 minutes for the question and answer session. But you, of course, you can stretch a little bit it's your freedom. And we are really eager to listen to you because the subject is really so difficult. Hinduism is it's such a multifaceted and long kind of a tradition. If you take Gita to be a representative in some sense of that, each of the adhyaya speaks of a different yoga, and that in fact is reflective of the kind of inherent pluralism that we have in the Hinduism's approach to life. So, floor is yours, sir, and you may start.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the Pune International Center, to Dr. Vijay Kelkar for this opportunity to be in interaction with you all on a rumination on what Hinduism is about. As Dr. Apte said, this is much too vast a subject to be compressed in a few minutes as part of a webinar. But I will share some thoughts with you, provide some kind of outline, if I may, about a highly ancient, refined, complex, and nuanced religion which goes under the rubric of Hinduism. I also want to thank Abhayji for his kind words of introduction. But since I have another engagement today and would like to be, if possible, uh, free by before 6:30, I will start straight away so as to give some time for any Q&As at the end of it. Uh, so let me begin by saying that Hinduism is not an organized and structural religion in the form of the Abrahamic faiths. It does not have any one single god. It is not about one temple or one pope or one mandatorily prescribed ritual or one book. But it is nevertheless a definable religion which is essentially at one point cerebral. I am not marginalizing the ritualistic aspect of Hinduism, which are important, but it is much more akin to a worldview, an ideological positioning, and is very often very opaque to outsiders. It's difficult to understand Hinduism because it deliberately challenges stereotypical, predictable structures, and yet it is a unified faith. So, where do we begin? When does Hinduism begin? I think Hinduism must count among those religions which began at the dawn of time, and unlike many religions of that period which later became antiquaries or museum relics or fossils, has continued in an unbroken stream ever since and is therefore called Sanatan. So, what could be its possible age? Very often, the beginnings of Hinduism are traced to the Rig Veda. And the Rig Veda was earlier dated to around 1500 BC. And it was dated in conflated with the coming of the Aryans, which were supposed to have come in as a form of invasion that overwhelmed the earlier Indus Valley civilization, making it a polarity between the Harappan civilization and the Aryans. But new research largely centered around the mythical river called Saraswati, shows that perhaps we need to push back our antiquity of this religion by at least a millennium, if not more. And that is because in the Rig Veda, there are at least 44 hymns which speak about the mighty Saraswati River. The Saraswati River figures in the Rig Veda 72 times. And there are three hymns entirely devoted to the Saraswati river that flows like a mighty stream from the Himalayas to the sea. Now, if the Rigved recognizes the Saraswati river as a mighty and tempestuous river, then the question arises that the recent research data, which is hydrological, which is geological, which is based on satellite mapping, which is based on textual material, archaeological evidence, study of the soil, seems to indicate that there was indeed a Saraswati river, but that around 2500 BCE to 2000 BCE, this river began to dry up due to a variety of causes in which I cannot go into detail, but that the river began to dry up and dwindle. But there was indeed, on the basis of this latest scientific evidence, a mighty river of the kind that Rigved refers to, but that which began to dry up around 2500 BC. Therefore, if the Rigved speaks of the Saraswati river when it was mighty and flowing from the Himalayas to the sea, then it must have been written sometime prior to 2500 BC. And therefore, today the Rigved is antedated, predated to by about 1000 years at the very least, if not more, which takes Hindu civilization or the Hindu religion to the very dawn of time, coterminous with other great ancient civilizations of the world. The Rig Veda was committed to text later, but it survived as an oral evidence. And one of the keys that provide one of the windows to Hinduism is the Nasidia Sukt of the Rig Veda. It's an amazing sukt where there are no fiats, there are no commandments, there are no prescriptive features, but it is a meditation, an exploration, a speculation on what could be that ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of the universe. So it is in itself, I'll just read a few lines, and the Rig Veda says, there was neither non existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Was there water bottomlessly deep? There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night or day. That one breathed, windless by its own impulse. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? The gods came afterwards with the creation of the universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heaven, only he knows, or perhaps he does not know. Now that provides a key to Hinduism. It's a rumination, an exploration, a meditation, a contemplation, devoid of fiat, devoid even to begin with formal structures, highly cerebral, highly full of ideation. And that's how Hinduism makes a beginning. And among the basic texts of Hinduism are the four Vedas, the Rig, the Yajur, the Sam, and the Atharva. Now, these Vedas are by those who believe them to be Shrutis or revealed texts, and collectively they are known as the Samhitas. Now, the Samhitas themselves, these four Vedas, are divided largely into three parts: the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. The Brahmanas are basically manuals of priestly ritual. The Aranyakas become already the beginnings of philosophical speculation on what truth could be or what the truth is. Aranya means forest. So those parts of the Veda were written in the deep recesses of the forest as a part of philosophical contemplation are called the Aranyakas. And finally, we have one of the crowning jewels of Hinduism, the Upanishads, which are attached to the different Vedas towards the end, and so they are also called Vedant or Upanishads, Vedant. So now the Upanishads, they're one of the foundational texts of Hinduism, are remarkable documents. They are metaphysical poems, which again are in the nature, like much of Hinduism, of a dialogue. It is not a one way monologue, but a question and answer where sages deep in the forest, the beneficiaries of prolonged contemplation and insight, speak about what the ultimate truth could be. And then they posture the truth as Brahm, a great cosmic energy, which is akhand, indivisible, adrisht, unseen, achintya, beyond thought. It is ekam ek sarvavyapi, all pervasive. It is nirvishesh chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness. It is purna, complete in itself. It is sarva pratyay darshanin, supremely intelligent. And above all, it is attributeless, nirguna. And so, this is the notion of Brahm. To give you just an example, the Mundak Upanishad has these lines: above the senses is the mind, above the mind is the intellect, above that is the ego, and above the ego is the unmanifested cause, and beyond is Brahman, omnipresent, attributeless. Realizing him, one is released from the cycle of birth and death. Now, the Upanishads, as I said, are one of the foundational texts of Hinduism. There are supposed to be 12 or 13 principal Upanishads. No one knows who wrote them, and no one even knows how many more there are. But there are supposed to be 12 or 13 principal Upanishads. Uh, uh, in addition to the Upanishads, there are two other documents to which I will refer later, which are considered the foundational texts of Hinduism. All on all, three: the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, remarkable document, roughly dated to around 450 BCE, attributed to Badrayana. And these are elucidations of the Upanishads in the nature of highly compressed aphorisms. Uh, 550 sutras or aphorisms. So this is the Brahma Sutra, and of course the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata, which we will come to later. So these are the three foundational texts of Hinduism. In addition, you have in Hinduism not one, but six systems of philosophy. There is the Nyaya, the Vaisheshik, the Sankhya, the Yog, the Purvamimansh, and the Uttarmimansh. Each of them, the one interesting thing about each of them and collectively of all six of them is that they can technically be called atheist because they are not speaking about God. They are not involved with conventional deity. They are exploring what could be the ultimate truth underlying this cosmos. So interestingly, they are almost atheist in their approach for that ultimate truth. The Nyaya in the 3rd century BCE is attributed to the sage Gautama, and it deals with logic, analysis, dialectics, and reasoning. The Vaisheshik, again of the same period, is attributed to sage Kannada, and one of its most amazing and unbelievably prophetic explorations is of that one indestructible and infinitesimal atom, the atomistic theory about what is the ultimate truth. Then there is the Sankhya, which goes back even further to the 7th century BCE and is attributed to sage Kapila, which visualizes a duality between Purush, the insentient ultimate spirit, and Prakriti, which is sentient matter, and the ultimate interface with them, which begins the process of creation, Srishti, and the cycle it establishes of between Srishti and Pralay, ultimate destruction, and then the cycle begins again. The Yog is very similar. Yog, which is attributed to sage Patanjali, again around the 4th century BCE, very similar to to the Sankhya. That's why they are hyphenated, Sankhya Yoga. Is about the physical and meditational discipline that enables one to achieve the sense of kaivalya, of the absolute focus and concentration on the only one that the Sankhya ultimately speaks about. And one of the great truths of the yoga school, incidentally, because it has a lot to do with the philosophical foundations of Hinduism, is the aphorism Yoga Chitti Vrit Narod. Yoga is the cessation of thought. When the mind, undistracted by thought, is in total peaceful, restful contemplation. Yoga is the path towards that absolute focus. And finally, you have the Purva Mimansh and the Uttar Mimansh. The Purva Mimansh is a school around the 4th century BCE attributed to the sage Jaimini, and it believes in Karma Kand. It believes that the practice of Vedic rituals in the proper manner is in itself a way to moksha or salvation. And finally, we have the Uttar Mimansh, which is the same as the doctrine of the Upanishads or that of Vedant or Advait. So these are the six systems of Hindu philosophy. and are quite remarkable in terms of their search for that absolute truth. So I am trying to spell out some kind of structure to you. The four Vedas, collectively categorized into the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, the nature of the Upanishads, arising from the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, and then based on the Upanishads and its speculation, six systems of Hindu philosophy, which takes you to different aspects of what the truth can be. Now, the two popular epics that are part of Hinduism are the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, but perhaps before that, I'd like to dwell a little more on the Advait school, the non dual school which says Brahm is the only reality. There is no other truth except that ultimate attributeless cosmic energy pulsating through the universe called Brahm. And among the Mahavakyas of the Upanishads are Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. You are that Brahm whose only experienced manifestation, but not definitional manifestation. Because any definition is invalid because it will circumscribe Brahm, which is by definition beyond definition. So, Brahm's experiential manifestation is that of pure joy, of bliss, and total awareness when the mind is silent. And in that process, the individual Atma and the cosmic Brahm are one and the same. I am Atma Brahm. The two are the same, or put differently, another Mahavakya of the Upanishads, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahm. And to realize Brahm, you have ultimately to conquer three aspects of your mental psyche. One is buddhi. The mind is eternally restless, flitting from one thought to another, like a monkey jumping from the branch of one tree to another incessantly. Still the mind. After the mind, there is the ahankar, the unsustainable belief in the fact that because I am, the world is, the belief of the ego, which seems to make you believe that you are the center of the universe and clouds the clarity of your thinking. So you have to still the mind, you have to conquer the ego, and ultimately awaken the third aspect of your mental psyche, which is the chitta, which is in all of us, silent, observant, complete in itself, but often pushed to the background by buddhi and ahamkar, ego and the restlessness of the mind. We awaken the chitta, and in that moment, we awaken the Atma within us, which is the same as Brahm. So there is absolute unity, no scope for duality, and that is why it is called Advait. And this school of philosophy has exercised more than the other five a profound influence on the overall spiritual worldview of Hinduism and has impacted those who are ordinary Hindus and those who are Hindu Pandits. It has become a very, and was later developed in the 8th century by one of Hinduism's greatest thinkers, as my book on Adi Shankaracharya is called. Adi Shankaracharya developed Advait into, elaborated upon it, and made it emerge as a powerful philosophical system. So, this now that I have finished with the philosophical and spiritual part in the time available to me, I would like to dwell on some aspects of popular Hinduism. And one of these are the corpus of mythological stories which are contained in the Puranas, which are still part of everyday living Hinduism, and the powerful impact of two epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Great narratives, great epics, recounting powerful stories of stories within stories, and they have exercised the popular imagination. Sri Ram is one of the most popular gods in Hinduism, as is Sri Krishna, both avatars of Vishnu. So in Hinduism, there is a trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and different gods are incarnations or avatars, except for Shiva. Shiva is the symbol of that ultimate non duality. At a popular level, he may have a consort, but that consort and him are Chitta and Chitta Rupini, the manifestations of that one indivisible Brahm. But Vishnu has incarnations, and Sri Ram and Sri Krishna are both incarnations of Lord Vishnu. And here I would like to come to the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is in the form of about 700 shlokas in 8 chapters. The Bhagavad Gita is attached to the Mahabharata, is a part of the Mahabharata, where Sri Krishna teaches Arjuna how to overcome the existential dilemmas that face man and women in ordinary or extraordinary situations between action and duty, between action and reward. And the Bhagavad Gita's doctrine of Nishkam Karma, of action without thought of reward, is a remarkable panacea for people in their ordinary everyday lives who invest their emotional and physical energy in actions, but perhaps carry it out most efficiently if, following the Bhagavad Gita, they do their actions as a consecration unto themselves without thought of reward. The Bhagavad Gita has exercised a very powerful impact on Hinduism. So there is the Bhagavad Gita, and then there is the Mahabharata, and then there is the great story of the Ramayana, and together they create a series of deities. One of the things that has always flummoxed foreign observers of Hinduism is that it's a religion full of deities. Gods have consorts, consorts and gods have children. gods fight with each other, and so on and so forth. Because the key to understand Hinduism is to ultimately overarch the apparent contradiction between Nirgun and Sagun. And I must elaborate briefly on this in the next 2 3 minutes. Adi Shankaracharya, drawing from the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutra, argued the absolute supremacy of Brahma. But Brahma, as an attributeless Nirgun concept, was much too dry to appeal to devotees who wanted something more tangible as a deity they could go to and worship. So, starting from Ramanuja, after Adi Shankaracharya, who was in the 8th century, around the 10th century, there was Ramanuja, then Nimbarkar, then there was Chaitanya, there was Vallabh, and others. They came out with doctrines that did not challenge the supremacy of Brahm but gave increasing space to a personal theism, allowing for Brahm to coexist with a conventional deity and allow for the manifestation of bhakti, where you have a personal God and not an impersonal Brahm. You can go to that God, you can pray to that God, you can ask from that God, you can surrender to that God, and you can appropriate that God. And thus was unleashed the Bhakti movement, which is among the most powerful movements of Hinduism. One of the most powerful movements of Hinduism spread over 600 years after the arrival of the Turkic invaders in India, somewhere in the middle, somewhere around the 12th century AD, CE. You had the development of the Bhakti school of Hinduism, where Hinduism was democratized, taken away from high altars and temples to the masses in their own languages through a plethora of remarkable poets, be it Tukaram, be it Namdev, be it Chandidas, be it Vidyapati, be it Surdas, be it Tulsidas, be it Basavanna, be it Alama Prabhu, be it Mirabai, be it the Alvars, the Nayanars, be it Andal. They took Hinduism to the masses, simplified it, democratized it, and it became far more a pulsating, living religion. And all of this happened in the 600 years after the 12th century CE. And it's one of the remarkable facets of Hinduism. So then you have the Nirguna recognition of that Brahm and the Sagun acceptance that Brahm can coexist with a personal deity, which was philosophically rationalized. Now, many foreigners say that there is a contradiction between Nirgun and Sagun. If all the only reality is that Nirgun Brahm, how can you have so many gods and goddesses? And actually, there is no contradiction. The Hindu mind, at one level, anchored in, secure in the belief of the one indivisible reality which is in you and me and everything immanent or non immanent, which is the cosmos itself. Anchored in that belief, they had the freedom at the level of the personal deification of deity. They gave free rein to their imagination, not at the cost of that belief, but as an extension of it. Because God is indeed, that ultimate is indeed without attributes, we accept it. Now, for only the purposes of our personal theism, we will give full play to our imagination in depicting it. And so you have the various depictions of our gods, the various names of our gods. And in consonant with the belief that that Brahm is immanent in everything, a tree is worshipped, a rock is worshipped, a river is worshipped, a mountain is worshipped, nature is worshipped, the elements are worshipped. So Hinduism becomes at two levels. One is the recognition of that absolute, and the third is the extravagant humanization of that absolute in the nature form of a myriad deities. But the Hindu mind is a harmonious schizophrenic. It believes in the ultimate reality of that one non dual Nirgun Brahm, and therefore can easily pursue the multiplicity of divinities it imagines for itself without believing that it is committing any form of betrayal. But this is often opaque to foreigners. Uh, I just wanted to explain this dialectic between Nirgun and Sargun because very often people don't seem to understand. And so then the question comes, here is the religion, which, because it is not formally structured and because it accommodates so accommodative to diversity, it is inclusive, it is plural. Does it constitute a religion? So there are scholars in the West with whom I don't agree, like Professor Wendy Doniger, who says, dare I call, dare I write Hinduism with a capital H? Because being used to the predictable structures of Abrahamic faiths to which she belongs, she is flummoxed by the sheer diversity of Hinduism and believes, therefore, that it is not one unified corpus of thought. She says it's a cross between a hedgehog and an armadillo or some such thing. I think that it is a superficial understanding of Hinduism because its accommodative nature may, as Professor Rajiv Malhotra has said, create chaos anxiety in the foreign observer. But for a Hindu, he is like a fish in water, believing in the one even as he or she believes in the many forms of it. So I think Hinduism is a unified religion and it is accommodative to diversity. Let me give you an example. I mentioned the six systems and not one of Hindu philosophy. But Hinduism considers as Hinduism even the Charvaks. The Charvaks are a school of materialist thinkers who believe the only reality is the reality they have and nothing exists beyond it, and who condemn the Vedas. They say it is a collection of lies. In any other religion, that would be blasphemy. But the Charvaks are as much a part of Hinduism. The Tantrics follow esoteric practices which are not part of mainstream Hinduism, but they too are considered a part of Hinduism. Because Hinduism is like a banyan tree, accommodative of many aspects, many schools, which it carries within its folds. And so, this ideological accommodation, inclusiveness, plurality, and accommodation of diversity is actually embedded in some other foundational statements of Hinduism, which we need to specially remember today. Ekam sat vipraha bahuda vadanti. The Rig Veda says the truth is one. Wise people call it by different names. At a time, remember, thousands of years ago, when nascently emerging tribes of people were saying, we alone have the monopoly of truth, our sages could say, the truth is one, but wise people can call it by different names. Another of the great sentences of Hinduism, Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. Around the same time, let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. At a time when people were building fortresses around themselves, keeping ideas from outside out. Here were Hindu sages saying, let good thoughts come to us from all directions. This is Hinduism. Again, it is Hinduism, and one of its great sentences, Udar Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. For the big hearted, the entire world is one family. It requires courage, it requires honesty of thought to say it at the time when it was uttered, when people were claiming that not the entire world but our own tribe is the only one that belongs to us. And here we were saying the entire world is a family. So, this is also the worldview of Hinduism, which we have to understand. I'm going to end here, uh, Professor Apte, because the subject is too vast. I can give separate lectures on each aspect of it. But I wanted to give you an overview of Hinduism and its many strands and its ethos. So I will stop here for you if there are any questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, sir. Very broad sketch, very broad brush, but a great expanse that you have covered in your lecture. As I've told you in the beginning itself, it's a really very vast subject, but you have done it so beautifully to give a kind of perspective which is not often ordinarily presented and accessible. I don't know, Abhay, are there any questions which have been there in the... Hello? You're mute.
Yes, sir. There are some questions and we'll take them.
So, let me just check.
Varma, one of the questions from Mr. Vilas Rajwade is what do you think are the two biggest challenges to Hinduism today and your recommendations for addressing them?
The two great challenges to Hinduism are one, the relative absence and change of mindset of Hindus to social evils within Hinduism, gender disparity, and caste discrimination. And we have a plethora, whether it was Swami Vivekanand, Mahatma Gandhi, Jyotibai Phule, whether social Swami Vivekanand who have spoken, Sri Aurobindo, Veer Savarkar himself, uh, great advocate of social reform within Hinduism. We need to tackle this great challenge where we seem to have made Hinduism coterminous with gender disparity through a misguided interpretation. And the degree of caste discrimination, oppression, and exploitation that still persists so called within the overall social purview of Hinduism. This is one big challenge. It needs reform, it needs change, and a change in mindset even more than laws. Secondly, there is a new form of distortion of Hinduism by the ultra Hindu right. which is trying to convert a faith which has survived because of its conquering eclecticism, because of its nuanced complexities, because of its cerebration, into an Wahhabi doctrine of a series of fiats by people who are illiterate about the actual meaning of real Hinduism. And they are the lumpen underbelly of the Hinduism which have been empowered today by the regime that exists and are taking Hinduism to its lowest common denominator. We need to fight that to protect him.
Sir, Mr. Prabhakar Khole thanks you for this very enlightening overview. And he wishes to know whether the word dharma can be confined to the limited definition and context of religion, of the word religion. There is often this confusion that dharma is equated with religion. What is your view, sir?
In fact, Hinduism's worldview is unique for its four purusharths: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. And dharma does not stand only for religion. Dharma is broadly, as I understand it, subject to correction, right conduct. But unlike Christianity, Hinduism does not have a set of 10 commandments. Dharma is a very nuanced concept. Dharma is about doing the right thing, but in the context in which you are doing it. So, Hinduism takes a very courageous stand towards what is ultimate ethical conduct. It's not that Hinduism believes in moral relativism or that it lacks an ethical core. But Hinduism refuses to take the easy path by saying this alone is dharma in all circumstances. Let me say, for instance, part of right conduct is not to steal. But a starving man who is about to die, if he plucks an overhanging apple from a rich man's orchard and eats it to survive, is it stealing or is it survival? Is it absolutely wrong or is it condonable? I'm giving you a random example. So Hinduism allows you to judge dharma as right conduct, both in absolute terms of certain values that need to be promoted and the contextual nature of the action, so as to fully understand whether you are right and if so, or wrong, and if so, to what extent. This is very important to understand about dharma.
So, such a fascinating overview that we would like to listen to you on and on, but it is approaching 6:30, and I will request Professor Apte to give his concluding remarks, since you have requested that we stop at around 6:30. Professor Apte, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ambassador Verma. Great lecture. You're very elegantly brought out the kind of pluralism and the kind of inherent dilemmas with which the Hinduism actually deals. If one looks at Shanti Parva or Anushasan Parva related discussions in Mahabharata, in fact, that's the kind of example that you gave. I think the Mahabharata is replete with such kinds of examples. For example, Anushasan Parva talks about the Gautami stories where her son dies of the snake bite. And she says that what is it that who is responsible doesn't matter to me. And there is a discussion between the Mrityu, the Kala, and the three people who are actually involved in this. And that actually shows the kind of nuances that one must exercise when making any kind of a judgment. And there are no real complete absolute principle. And the real challenge of life is, in fact, to choose a kind of a more nuanced, more prudent kind of a balance between more than one competing principles with which you are required to choose and act. So, and that is something which is very reflective of much of the so-called Hindu tradition, that it can bear with several such kinds of outlooks, perspectives, and arguments without necessarily resulting into a conflict of it, because there is an implicit recognition that probably there are situations where there are many versions of truth, and that is also one of the ways in which you can say that Bahuda Vadanti. So there could be various ways in which one can probably look at the different, it's a prismatic kind of view or a kaleidoscopic kind of a view. And I think you have brought out this very important feature of the so-called Hindu tradition. And in contrast to several other religions, probably it would be possible to compare. And we would really look forward to you to come and give also talk on the Hinduism in its comparative perspective even a little more, because that is something which is probably that needs to be highlighted today in a variety of ways. So look forward to meet you again on this. And thank you very much for a very elegant lecture, sir. So thank you. I thank all of the people who are around here, and on their behalf, I thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kelkar, would you like to make any comment? Yeah. Sir, we would like to thank you, and as Professor Apte said, we would like to invite you once again for a longer session, and there are many questions which we are not able to take up as of now. But thank you very much for giving us your time. And I would just like to mention to our audience that our next event is the National Conference on Social Innovation on 17th and 18th November. You are most welcome to participate in this event, which is a very fascinating display of social innovations coming in from all over the country. This is the 9th annual conference. I think Dr. Kelkar would like to make some comments. Sir, before we close, would you like to say something?
No, Abhay. I mean, I just want to join Professor up to thank Ambassador for absolutely